So the first talk, I'd like to offer something of value to both beginning practitioners or people perhaps who have been working with self-inquiry, interested in awakening, but also more seasoned practitioners, so to speak. And I find that pure inquiry into the nature, ultimately, of identity, is valuable, really for quite a long time during this unbinding process. Because identity, or the functioning of identity, or the paradigm of identity, sticks around a long time in some form or another. It's also tied into a lot of experiences, perceptual filters, and so forth that you wouldn't necessarily realize it's tied into. So, for instance, it's directly tied into the perception that there's a subject and an object in experience. That experience itself is somehow defined by subject-object, that there's an experiencer and an experience. That paradigm itself sticks around for quite a while, but it is also rooted in the sense of, or the very fundamental belief in self or identity. Similarly, the belief or perception or experience of form is rooted in the sense of self. Also, reactivity, resistance is rooted in the sense of self, or the identity structure. The perception of will, personal will, that it, number one, exists, and number two, has a function and a purpose, and that it feels like you. These are rooted in the sense of identity, the background sense of identity. So it's valuable to investigate this in a direct and open way. But I will structure this for anyone who is working with self-inquiry or for the purpose of that initial shift in identity, the shift where we suddenly recognize that we are not our thoughts. But we recognize this in a very clear and thoroughgoing way, such that we don't experience ourselves the same way anymore. We don't experience the same way anymore. So this is something that can be done at any time. It can be done while sitting, it can be done while working, walking, laying down, falling off to sleep. There's no right or wrong time. But sometimes, if the conditions are right for it, it's a very powerful act. And you can't align those conditions yourself. You can't force conditions to be other than they are. But you can approach this with some consistency, with some exuberance and interest and openness. And you may start to sense when conditions are ripe, such that these movements of inquiry become very potent, very powerful. Often in retreat, when we've been engaging in sustained meditation, we'll find these opportunities. Often when falling off to sleep, with just that last glimmer of consciousness blinking out, we find an opportunity to allow that identity investigation, that inquiry into who and what we are, if anything at all. it's a very auspicious time for that investigation. So be open to moments where this comes to you, to ask the question, to turn inward, to let go into the questioning itself, to let go into the impetus to question, to let go into the most fundamental question for you. A question so fundamental that you can't even formulate it into words. Be open to that, and the opportunity will present itself. Now, there will be times when you don't feel open. The mind is cluttered with thoughts, or you feel uncomfortable, or you feel dysphoric, or you feel intense emotions and so forth. A lot of doubt, perhaps. There are going to be times like that, of course. That doesn't mean that it's not valuable to inquire in those moments, because it is. And sometimes in the midst of the most intense doubt, the most intense confusion or disorientation, is where the spell of identity breaks. It's not always that way, but it's not uncommon. That when we feel the most disoriented, sometimes the most frustrated, like giving up, like, what the heck are we even doing here? What am I trying to figure out? What am I trying to solve? The mind just keeps getting tied up, twisted up, confused. Sometimes that's the most auspicious set of conditions for a transformation to occur. You can't know that. You won't be able to predict it, but it does happen. So don't get discouraged if during retreat, or any other time, but during retreat, there will be moments where the mind just feels like a storm of thoughts, where the emotional landscape is just so intense, and there's a lot of resistance just interwoven with those emotions, and you can't even sort out where the resistance begins and the emotions end. That will happen. You're going to have periods of those experiences, but it's still valuable to inquire. So anytime during retreat is a good time. That's the basic message here. So then how do we go about inquiring? How do we start? Well, there's no exact right way. There are many approaches to this and many nuances to it. And some of it you'll figure out on your own. Some of it, especially when it becomes spontaneous, or you feel something starting to let loose or clarify in a way that's ineffable, indescribable, and you've exhausted your mind, you've exhausted your thinking, analyzing, preparing, anticipating. When that part of your mind has become exhausted, meaning it quiets down, or you're not buying it anymore, you're in a good place. That's a good place to be when it comes to inquiry. So in those moments when something just feels like it's opening or already open, just be alert with a dilated or wide open attention field. Perhaps I could say alert in the space of thought, concept, mind, consciousness. But that's not necessary. It may just be appearing for you that way. But be wide open and alert. And that may be all that's required of you. Now, the alertness is a sort of It's a sort of surrendered engagement in experience, meaning you're not judging anything at all. You're not alert so that you can pick and choose or push and pull. You're alert because you feel the mystery at hand. You feel the ineffable coming into experience. You feel something beyond you instinctually. So when that alertness coalesces with that surrender to the mystery, then you find a certain balance. The balance is you don't go unconscious, certainly knowingly go unconscious, meaning mind wandering, daydreaming, thinking about what's not happening, which is what happened 5 minutes ago and an hour ago and 2 days ago. So we're not slack in our attention such that we easily go unconscious. We're also not trying to control experience. We're not trying to force anything to happen. We're not trying to make anything happen. And we're not comparing what is happening or what is apparently happening to some idealized experience either. We're just alert. There's a sort of relaxed alertness. And when the attention is dilated out into all spaces, then in a sense, you could say nothing escapes your notice. But the funny thing about this is that really only happens when we're not labeling. If we're labeling, then in one sense, our notice is already, what we notice is already being partitioned. So no labeling. Now, if you can find this that I'm speaking about, this space, this relaxed alertness, wide open, perhaps curious, but with no preconceived expectations. And that's important. You're not remembering what someone said about self-inquiry and looking for it. It's not that. Those would be thoughts. You would notice, oh, there's a thought here. Okay. And just wide open and alert beyond that thought. It'll calm down when we don't engage it. So when you're here, when you're in this space, when you instinctually get what I'm saying, that you'd have to make effort to go unconscious at this point. You'd have to make effort to start down a mind road, a thought road, past, future, problem, solutions. And yet you're alert, engaged in experience, but surrendered to experience. Okay, when you're here, when you're knowingly in that space, you can ask a question, but you don't have to. Often the questions really just sort of clarify this wide open, curious alertness, or bring you back to it immediately. So a question could be, what is the next thought that's going to arise? With no expectations that there will be one, or the nature of it, or analyzing what that even means. Just the question, to direct attention into every space, every possible space, such that if a thought starts to stir, it will be noticed. That's a good question. What is the next thought that's going to arise? And then we just look, remain alert, open, and relaxed. So relaxed means that if you do start noticing some body tension, something tensing up on one side of the body or your face, jaw, etc., and just take a moment to put your attention there. Relax it. If you need to relax your jaw, move it around, move your shoulders, of your body. The reason I say this is when we first start finding ourselves in this space, the body can react to it in a kind of intense way. Doesn't always, but it can. It can feel like it's grasping or holding something. The body's interpreting that, like holding a space, holding an alertness. The body may interpret it that way without even the internal verbal description of it. But if you look, you'll notice. And then it's often as simple as just putting attention into those tense places, letting the body relax again. And then noticing the alertness is still there, still available. So we return to this alertness, wide open, such that nothing is going to escape notice because we're not focusing on anything specific, not picking and choosing. And we ask, what is the next thought that's going to arise? And you're just there, alert, waiting without expectation. Now, what thought may arise? Could be anything. Could be an analysis of the practice type thought. That's a common one. Oh, I wonder if I'm doing this right. Okay, well, that's a thought. It's a thought. Maybe you could say it's a doubt thought. You could recognize that about it. All right, return back to the practice. Wide open, alert, not discriminating. What is the next thought that's going to arise? Another common thought that occurs here is like, oh, I can always lead myself here. I find this place easily, but, right, what's ever beyond that, but it's usually like, but I find it gets boring, or I find that I get scared, and my body gets, tensed up, or my heart rate goes up, and I feel fear, and then I can't stay here, right? So you recognize, okay, that's a thought. That's the thought. That's the thought that arose, that appeared. And then we just return to the alert, open, relaxed, curious, orientation. Again, we can introduce a question, but we don't have to. Perhaps you've asked the question enough times, it's already become internalized. It's become digested, and your whole being knows this question. Who am I? Why do I suffer? What is this? What is silence? What is prajna wisdom? What is Buddha nature? What is awakening? What was my face before my parents were born? I say all these different types of questions because I never know which one might resonate with you. And it may be none of those questions, maybe something different. But if you ask the question enough times, it gets internalized. It gets built into the experience. The moment you return to this open spaciousness, this alert presence, the question's already being asked. Curiosity is already there. But more importantly than the curiosity, your instinct that there's a very real living answer is there, or you wouldn't be here. If you've gotten this far, then there's some instinct there that knows. Knows what? Well, I don't want to put it into words because I could, but I could say it's what's on the other side. It's what happens when identity falls. The illusion of identity dissolves. It's what's remaining. It's the unborn. I could use terms for it, but that's not helpful. Something in you already knows that there's that possibility. Not only a possibility, it's already the case, of course. So that's already there. And the question often just gets assimilate it into your experience or into your intention as you inquire. So again, it's a matter of your own feeling into, do you need a question here or do you not? At some point, often you get to this place where there's just the question, the inquiry, your sense of self, your sense of experience, aliveness, all of it's just intermixed. There's no distinction anymore at all, anywhere. And you go to this place, it's not a place, that is just absolutely beyond description in any way. But it's also not somewhere else. It's right here. That's a good place. The first time that you start to touch into that, it does usually, but not always, cause a fear response, because you're just going off the map. You feel it. You're going off the map. The mental map, the cognitive map, the identity map. So as I say over and over, because I think it helps to just not be too surprised when that happens, or maybe you're surprised, but you recall that message that it's okay. It's what happens, and you'll get through it. You're not dying, but your mind might tell you you are. You're not going to go crazy, but your mind might tell you you will. It's a physical experience, it's a physical set of symptoms or sensations. Your heart rate will go up. You may feel sweaty, or you may feel shaky, but it may just feel like an intense fear in the middle of your chest. Once you've sort of crossed over this threshold, that tends to subside. And beyond that, it's this strange world where you kind of fluctuate between what feels like identity or feels like a self apart, and this place where no self could ever exist, no identity could exist. None of what we think about when we talk about ourselves or talk about life and others and even spiritual doctrine, none of that even makes sense here. So we tend to find that we fluctuate in and out, in a sense. It feels like that for a while, for quite a while. But even in that, during that movement, that fluctuation, it's quite valuable to remind yourself, lead yourself back to this relaxed alertness, openness with your attention. Immediately engaging or assimilating all experience without judging, without filtering. Is this one I want? Is this one I don't want? That's a thought. Is this a good experience or a bad experience? Those are thoughts. Is this an enlightened experience, or is it not quite there yet? Another thought. These are all thoughts. So as we let those go, we again notice this extremely simple, always available, immediate possibility. I could say this is our basis for practice, always, in one sense, beyond this. And it's not always a deeply meditative experience either. People can experience this while even in strenuous activity like exercise, running, things like that. You find your way into it however you do. Now, if you ask, who am I? That may or may not be an interesting question to you. For many people, it's not. For some people, it definitely is. If you ask, who am I? First first type of answer you get is a conceptual answer, right? Biographical information the mind will produce. Oh, I'm Angelo. I'm this many years old. I'm from this town. I'm male. I'm female. I identify this way or that way. It may describe some preferences you have. Here's what I like to do. I like to cook. Or it may lead to thoughts about what's important to you, what's not important to you, things you feel strongly about, your opinions, your views of the world, even very compassionate views and opinions of the world. So all of that information has its place, of course. There's a place for talking about where you came from. There's a place for talking about how old you are. There's a place for talking about your political concerns or whatever. There are relative times in life when these are valuable, of course. So I'm not negating that, just to be clear. But when we talk about inquiry and we talk about identity, you can pretty quickly realize that's not you. You may have a strong opinion about something, but if you had said a different set of experiences in life, you'd been around different people, you'd been raised differently, you may well have a completely different opinion, but it could still feel like you, right? It would still feel like your opinion. And this is why this is a bit of an aside, but it's quite interesting to watch what happens when there's like a political debate, political discussion where two people feel so entrenched and they're so sure they're right. It's because they feel like they're defending themselves, not an opinion or a view. That's identifying with beliefs or views and so forth. So pretty quickly, if we ask the question, who am I? We can see, oh, okay, well, I'm not all these beliefs I have about the world. I'm not these beliefs I have about myself, right? If I had been named something other than Angelo, would this not be here? Well, that doesn't make any sense. You could think of every memory you have about yourself, the summation of all memories, and say, well, seems like that's me, right? Well, what if you suddenly had a head injury and you had amnesia, but you were wide awake right now and you just didn't have a memory? Would this cease to be? Whatever this is, would it cease to be? No. So you're probably not your collection of memories. So it leaves not a lot of places to look, but you could ask, well, maybe I'm the body, right? I'm the body producing consciousness, let's say, if you have a scientific mind, right? So let's go to the senses. Look at what's right in front of your face. Do you see a body? Do you see, quote unquote, your body? Or do you just see colors, forms, and shapes? So who are you? When you don't give your mind something to chew on. Like, oh, I'm consciousness that arose from this and that neural pathways. Thoughts, those are all thoughts in this moment. How can that be who you are? Because you could have erroneous thoughts about all of that are not perhaps scientifically accurate. Those wouldn't define who you are either. So that's the beginning of the approach with the question, who am I? Because when you stop looking in thoughts, if you stop looking in analytical data, memories, etc., for the answer to who am I, there's really only one place left to look. Where's that? Where can you look when you can't look into thoughts anymore? Meaning you've cut that escape route off for yourself. Now, you may have to exhaust it. You may have to go through these practices to realize you really aren't your thoughts. But At some point, you can just tell yourself, okay, I'm not going to entertain thoughts about it. They may come, but I'm not going to entertain that they're the answer, because they're not. So where else can I look for the answer to who am I? Who am I? Where can I look for that? Where's the only one place I can look? Look for it. You're already looking from it. So are you looking, or are you not looking? Can you stop looking? Have you ever not been looking? Maybe the questions don't matter and it's just looking. Maybe we made up an identity by asking questions about identity, and there's just this looking. Look there. It's so simple that it makes people laugh when they get this. Laugh really hard, like roll on the floor. Where else can you look? Where can you look for the looking? Who are you? I don't want to describe it beyond this. I could say something about the mechanics of consciousness, but hopefully if that question works for you and it hasn't broken open yet, this leads you to that. It's close, so close. Look for the looking from the looking. Okay. Another way of asking this question would be, where am I? Some people like this version of it, or it just feels intuitively meaningful. Where am I? For me, at least as I perceive it, this question almost picks up where the other one left off, where I was describing who am I, when you get to this place where you're looking at where the looking is. You're trying to perceive directly what's doing the perceiving, right? Where am I? Okay, well, I know I'm nowhere else, that's for sure. So any imagined thing I could come up with, like anywhere outside of this immediate environment, well, I'm certainly not there. Anywhere I've ever been based on my memory, I'm not there, right? So you usually are led, most of the time at some point you're led with this kind of question of where am I, to a feeling of a space inside what you describe as the body, like in here. Something will lead you to this sense that there's something in here somewhere, often up in here, sometimes down in the chest, but it's often in the head. There's something in here that's where I am. So sometimes that's that curiosity itself, because it just asking that question experientially feels so simultaneously fascinating and simultaneously kind of absurd. But it makes you want to look, makes you actually want to look of where I am. Where does it feel like I am? And then look wherever you look wherever your attention naturally goes. Does it go inward, back, behind, around? Does it go outward? Where am I? Seems like you should be able to find it, right? Right. If we look at just how we, in a practical sense, talk about ourselves to other people. Oh, I went here, I live there, I do this for work. There should be an I in there you're talking about, right? So this is your opportunity to look for it. Is it 2 inches behind your nose? 2 inches behind your eyes? So look for it experientially. Is it the whole body, for instance? Does it feel like it's the whole body? Does it feel like it's more one part of the body than the other part of the body? In the direct perception of the feeling of where am I? Does it feel like it's more inside or outside of what you might call the body? As you're thinking about this, by the way, remember, it's not a thought. It's not imagined body. It's the actual sensation of where you feel like you are right now, where you feel like you are hearing this, where you feel like you are feeling the sensations, wherever those are. Are you apart from the sensations? Are you in here somewhere, like a few inches back, and the sensations are there and you're feeling from here to there? Put your attention in the sensations in your body, anywhere in your body. Does it feel like other than you? So is that where you are? Or are you led back to a sense of what feels like a center? If you are, great, look there. And similar to what I was talking about with who am I and other inquiry questions, if you feel tension in the body, if you feel something that feels tight or contracted, or like you're pushing or pulling or struggling to clarify something with your attention, just relax. Just put your attention for a moment in those tense places. Move them around if you need to, just relax. Let your body relax to the degree you can. And then return to this questioning from the place of relaxation rather than from the place of, I have to know this. I'm going to break through. That can be helpful at times too, but at some point it usually relaxes because you realize somewhere deep inside that you can't force this, but you can participate in it when the conditions arise. And the conditions of a retreat are very good conditions. So you can relax and just become curious. You're more along for the ride than driving, for sure. So yeah, where am I? Where does it feel like I am? Just keep looking through that space, in those spaces. You can ask a question here and there like I was doing. If your mind wanders, for instance, you can redirect it back with a question. Okay, well, where am I then? Right behind the nose? Or does it feel like it's kind of a vague area? Okay, well, it feels more like a vague area. Where is there an edge to that vague area? It's kind of weird. It seems like it goes outside the head. Where am I? That kind of thing. So that's another inquiry question. Another inquiry question might be, where is the boundary between myself as the perceiver of thoughts or the thinker and a thought itself? Where's the boundary between? This one, the intention or the impetus to ask this question arises in me a lot because people talk to me in a certain way and they'll say, well, I know I'm not my thoughts, and I noticed this thought and I noticed that thought, and they start talking in this way that feels like a dualistic. And a lot of this is the limitations of language, but it sounds dualistic, like I'm the one observing all this happening, almost like I'm observing the me that's observing thoughts. And I'm inclined to just say, well, how do you know there's a difference between you that is describing all of this stuff happening, or you that's observing the process of an I and a thought and all of it? Why is that different? How is that experientially apart from the mechanism of thinking, of knowing, of thought? Well, it must be some kind of physical boundary there, right? Or some kind of experiential boundary. So look for it. Find that sense of I as close as you can. Feel into it wherever it is. And then, as I said before, notice the next thought that's arising, or notice the current thought that's here, that's binding your attention. What is that thought? Substance. Where is it? Does it feel like it's inside your head somewhere, floating out in space? Does it feel distant or close? And as you perceive or question these experiential curiosities, does it feel like there's a vantage point from which you're applying this curiosity, this thinking? Do you feel separate from all of that somehow as the curious one, as the questioner? If that's the case, that's fine too. Where is it? Follow your experience right back to that sense of the witness. Some people call it the witness. Where's that? Back farther behind, right? Somewhere back there. Where is it? And then follow it to the thought that says, I am confused. I have a headache. Whatever thought is arising. Okay. Where does it feel like that is? Where does it feel like you are? And is there any other background witness vantage point? Find any boundaries between those. Explore the seeming locations of all of those. And I don't want to give you a goal, but you generally will find there's not so much a boundary, and they're also not so much in different places. They're also kind of not in any specific place, which is interesting. Tends to be quite nebulous. But the act of exploring this directly brings you into that intuitive exploration I was talking about that I can't describe for you, but you can find it, and it's so obvious that you don't need validation from a teacher or something. You don't need someone to go, yeah, that's the right thing. You just know, oh man, it is so close. It has always been here. I don't even know why I know it's always here, because it's just so obvious, but I don't need to know, and I don't need to describe, and I don't need to tell anyone. I don't need validation for this. It's just is that close, that simple, that obvious. This is so simple. What I'm pointing to here is so simple. It's so easy to complicate it with words. And I've been talking for 45 minutes, but these are all just pointers. Again, you'll find yourself in this open, wordless, clear, obvious space. But it won't have any of those labels defining it. That's important. And it's fluid, but it also has this profound stillness to it. It has this profound peace. Even expectation, even anticipation is a thought here. Perhaps the final barrier sometimes is the belief that an awakening is going to happen or a shift is going to happen. Because that turns very quickly into anticipation, to a future view. And awakening is not in time. Awakening is to recognize directly the timeless, The only way you can recognize instinctually, obviously, and undoubtedly what is always here is to recognize the illusion of time simultaneously. If there's time, there's nothing that's always here because things change and come and go and all of it. That's a psychological mechanism that helps us function in the relative world. But you can wake up to what is not that. Not subject to time. So it's not subject to different events. There aren't differences. There aren't different things, events, people, situations. It's undifferentiated. Undifferentiated knowing. Knowingness. I see a lot of people in comments like making comments about their experience, which is fine. You can do whatever you want. It's your retreat. But this that I've been doing is something to follow along with, and really drop yourself into the immediate experience. If you're asking questions about it or describing it to anyone else for any reason, etc., like, why? This has to be full on experience. You have to relinquish the knower. You have to relinquish all those reasons you want this. You have to relinquish all the reasons you want to tell other people you understand it or know it or have had it or not had it, or all of those, even though they don't seem like it, are usually just distracting thoughts, distracting tendencies. You got to cut off your escape routes, and the escape routes are all up here in the mind, in the thoughts. You got to cut off that mind road for this. The seeming barriers that divide up your experience, and you won't for a while realize that's even happening, that your experience is being like dissected all the time by this mind, the thought system or whatever. But those dissections, all those barriers, all of it is thought, actually. But identity has developed intertwined with thought. So it feels like what we are. That's why I harp on it, push on it. I restate it again and again and again and again, like how to get under thought, belief, perception, how to get leverage on yourself, let's say, or how to completely surrender and realize you can't. Through thought, you can't get under thought. But there's a whole other possibility available all the time. And the frustration is okay. Part of this, part of the deal. But just keep redirecting that frustration into inquiry, into asking, querying, looking, exploring this immediate without making conclusions. Important.